So if you've been trying to find the perfect Atlanta suburb for you and your family, you do not want to miss this video. The North Atlanta suburbs are by far the most desirable area in all of Metro Atlanta for families. And in today's video, we are going to cover over 20 different neighborhoods in the North Atlanta suburbs in detail, give you a sense of what it's like to live in those areas so that you can decide which neighborhood is going to be the best fit for you and your family. Let's get right into it. So of course, there are fantastic suburbs in all different directions around Metro Atlanta, but in particular, the most desirable suburbs are concentrated in North Atlanta, and there's two main reasons. The first is going to be the quality of the public schools. The highest rated and most consistent high quality across the board tends to be found in the suburbs to the north of Atlanta. In particular, the counties of Cobb, Gwinnett, Forsyth, North Fulton, and Cherokee. The other big reason are the amenities. Now, one piece of those amenities are the high quality suburban downtown areas that you find in the North Atlanta suburbs. And the other piece of that is access to the nature related amenities in North Georgia. The big ones being the two lakes, Allatoona and Lanier, and the North Georgia mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, the rivers, lakes, and even vineyards that can be found in North Georgia. All of which are going to be way easier to access and enjoy if you live in a suburb to the north of Atlanta. So I am about to go over all of the most relevant neighborhoods in the North Atlanta suburbs. And for every neighborhood, I'm going to give you the following information: where it falls on a scale from the most rural to the most urban, where it falls in a scale of amenities in that neighborhood, the lowest being Dollar General, and the highest rating being an Erwin Market, which we don't have in Georgia, but I'm trying to communicate, the typical level of amenities, both for grocery stores, but also just for things to do generally in that area. I'm also going to list the average commute from each neighborhood to Midtown Atlanta and from each neighborhood to the airport in South Atlanta. We are also going to put up graphics for the average school rating in these neighborhoods and a chart showing you the demographics, because I know diversity is very important to a lot of you. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. I'm sure my editor is mad. He's got to put all this information in one video. I'm going to try to talk quickly because I have a tendency to run on, but let's pull up a map and dive right in. All right, we've got a map pulled up, and real quick, I'm just going to give you an overview of the area that we'll be covering today. So you see the perimeter of Atlanta here, and this is the area that we're covering today. These are all of the most relevant neighborhoods, in my opinion, for someone considering a suburb of Atlanta to live in. I think any further than this would be just a very rural area for someone who's really not concerned how far they are from Atlanta, and all of the most popular North Atlanta suburbs are going to be included today. So switching maps here we have a different map of the city of Atlanta. The perimeter is down here. We will start in Marietta, and we will go in a clockwise spiral. So right off the bat, Marietta is one of the best choices for someone who has to commute consistently into Atlanta, but they want a suburban environment with good quality public schools for their kids. Now, traffic around Atlanta and in Atlanta is absolutely crazy. One very important thing to note, generally speaking, is that your commute both into the city and to the airport is going to be a little bit easier from the Cobb side than the Gwinnett side. It's a little closer geographically, and there's a little bit less congestion on average coming into town. Marietta is also an area with really good value, in my opinion. It's much more affordable than an area like an Alpharetta. This is an area where you can still get a nice starter home in the low $400,000 range. And there are a lot of high quality amenities in this area. Downtown Marietta is very cute and has some great restaurants. You're also very close to the Battery, which is closer to Smyrna. This is where the Atlanta Braves play, but it's also kind of a mixed use, restaurants, shopping. There's plenty of things to do there even when the Braves are not playing. Six Flags is also on this side of town. And as I said, the city is a very easy commute, so you can do a date night without it being a big production here in the city. So we're going to talk about Lawrenceville in a little bit, but for my clients who commute into the city of Atlanta 5 days a week, but they need to be in the suburbs for whatever reason, Marietta and Lawrenceville are some of the first places that I mention if they're working with a budget under $500,000. All right, next, let's look at Kennesaw, which is just a bit to the northwest. Now, this is a little bit of a college town. Kennesaw State University is here. A lot of activities and events revolve around that. In doing research, it's often referred to as a typical mall suburb that's really directly off the highway, and that would be the town center at Cobb. Kennesaw has a nice downtown area, and your median sales price year to date in 2024 is $415,000. So maybe you like Cobb County, you're okay with being a little further from the city, and you're working with a slightly lower budget, Kennesaw could be a very good option. All right, let's keep going a little northwest and look at Acworth. Now, as you can see, Acworth runs right up against Lake Allatoona, which is not as developed as Lake Lanier, but is still a fantastic amenity to be close by to. You also have Red Top Mountain, which is another great spot for nature lovers. This area is really not going to be too dissimilar from Kennesaw, although in doing research, it has been described as a bit of a dichotomy. You've got areas with multi-million-dollar homes, and then you do have a few areas that could be a little sketchy. But of course, that's all relative. I really don't think any of the suburbs that we are going to talk about today you would need to cross off the list solely because of safety. There's a median sales price year to date here of $410,000. So again, pretty good relative value for being a suburb of a major city and a safe, nice suburb with good schools and plenty of things to do. All right, next up, let's look at Woodstock, heading a bit to the east. Woodstock is one of the best suburbs of all Metro Atlanta. In particular, it's known for having a fantastic downtown area with lots of high quality shopping. It's also known for being a very safe area with high quality public schools, and I think it offers a really nice country suburban vibe. Now, we are definitely already in the territory where if you're commuting into the city frequently, this could be a really nasty commute. And Highway 92 in particular, if you find yourself having to rely on this highway, it has a reputation for being a huge pain, especially at the junction with 575. Your median sales price currently year to date is $442,000 here. So we're starting to get a little bit more expensive, but still good value in my opinion compared to suburbs that are not too far away like Alpharetta or Milton. If you're looking for a classic country suburb, you don't mind being a little bit further away from the city, I think it would be hard to do better than Woodstock. All right, moving north here, we're going to look at Canton. This is as far north as we're going to go. Ironically, it probably has the most down south feel. It's probably the most rural on the list. Now, it has been built up quite a bit in the last 5 to 10 years. It's got a really cute downtown area. So by no means are we in the sticks or the middle of nowhere, but unlike many of the other suburbs we're going to talk about today, in Canton, as you go further out, whether it's north, east, or west, it's going to get very rural very quickly. Still good schools, great nature, and as I said, fairly far north. So if you're someone who spends a lot of time in North Georgia or maybe Tennessee or the Carolinas, it's going to be much easier to enjoy those places frequently living in an area like Canton. Now, if you're working in the city or you have to go to the airport frequently, to me it would not be a good option, but there's plenty of people who do way longer commutes than that on a daily basis, so I wouldn't necessarily cross it off the list for that reason. All right, so now we're going to move east towards Cumming, and if you're wondering why we're skipping all this area in between, because there's not a whole lot going on in these areas. So as you can see, Cumming is very close to Lake Lanier, which is a big deal. I know you've probably heard horror stories about Lake Lanier. They've made a few movies about it. At the end of the day, this is a really popular, high-quality amenity to live near. It's extremely popular during the 4th of July and the warmer months. So if you own a boat or you just like spending time on a lake, this is a huge benefit of being in an area like Cumming. Now, Cumming is often described as a suburb of Alpharetta, and this is an area that actually gets really, really busy on the weekends, which also may be a little bit of a downside. You see, there's not a ton going on in the areas directly surrounding Cumming. So on the weekends, that's kind of the destination. Everyone comes into town and enjoys the city of Cumming, which is great, but it means it gets really congested on the weekends. It's also important to note that many home addresses will have Cumming in the address, but not be in the city of Cumming. So if you are looking in this area, just be careful. Make sure, even if it's a Cumming address, it's in the area that you want it to be in. Now, there is a lot of new construction in Cumming. There's a lot of development in Cumming. This area and Forsyth in general is one of the fastest growing areas in all of Metro Atlanta. So a lot of things are shiny and new, which is great. Because of that, it's gotten pretty expensive pretty quick. Year to date, the median sales price in Cumming is $565,000. Now, that doesn't mean you can't find a starter home on more of a budget, but it's not exactly a major value play. This is a great suburb to focus on if you're keen on being close to Lake Lanier, you enjoy the vibe of North Georgia, but you would also like to occasionally come into the city of Atlanta without it being too big of a headache. All right, let's keep heading east-southeast and look at Buford. We're now in Gwinnett County, which is significant. I did a whole video about the differences between Cobb and Gwinnett County, so if you're looking at either of those areas, that video could be very beneficial for you. But North Gwinnett in particular is known for having some of the highest rated public schools in the state. And really, when I discuss North Gwinnett, that's going to cover the areas of Suwanee, Sugar Hill, and Buford. The city of Buford public schools are often some of the highest rated schools in the state, and they're known for their youth sports. The city of Buford is heavily recruited by colleges for football, so if you have children with ambitions to be in sports in some capacity, that would be a plus for the Gwinnett area. And it's important to note too, Gwinnett on average is way more diverse than any of the other counties we're going to cover today. And of course, as you can see, Buford borders Lake Lanier, which is a huge amenity to have so close by. There's also the Mall of Georgia, which is a fairly big destination, and Atlanta is only about 50 minutes to an hour and 15 away, depending on where exactly you are, so you're not too far from the city. Now, there is a little bit more variability in terms of the areas and the crime, so you'll want to make sure you're working with someone who really knows this area very well. But there's also some good value in Buford. I was looking at some pretty decent looking starter homes in the low $400,000 range here. All right, let's go south a little bit to Suwanee. Now, Suwanee is consistently in my top 5 suburbs list of Atlanta. This is an area that's very family focused. Their downtown area is really revolving around children, splash pad, amphitheater, green spaces. You're always going to see families and kids out playing all over Suwanee. It's a very green area, as much of Metro Atlanta is, but tons of parks. And I should mention, by the way, Gwinnett is also known for having a fantastic park system. So just a really nice atmosphere in Suwanee. As I said, Gwinnett County schools, so pretty much highly rated across the board. Now, you're not going to have as many things to do here as you would in Alpharetta, but one of the big benefits is how close you are to Duluth, which we'll talk about in a second, and if you're a fan of ethnic food, this would be a major plus, because Suwanee is just north of Duluth. Now, this has gotten to be a more expensive area, especially in the last 5 years. I think you're going to need a starter home budget at least in the high 4s to get started here. But if you like Gwinnett County and you want a good balance between access to the city and access to Lanier and North Georgia, Suwanee is one of the best places you could look. All right, moving right along, let's look at Lawrenceville, a little to the southeast. I mentioned it when I discussed Marietta. These are similar in a way in the sense of how I think about them, where when I'm talking with families who have to commute in town consistently, they're working with a budget under $500,000, and they need good public schools, again, Marietta and Lawrenceville are some of the first places that I mention. Lawrenceville is still an area with pretty good value when you consider, all those factors that you're getting, the schools, the amenities, the proximity to the city. This is an area where, if you're open to an attached option, you can still be in the 300s or even lower. If you need a detached home, you can probably still get by in the high 300s. It's really going to be about your tolerance for finishes, but it's going to be much easier to find good value here than some of the other suburbs we're going to discuss. Lawrenceville also has a really nice downtown area. It keeps growing, they keep adding things, and it's a pretty nice downtown suburb. Again, Gwinnett County, so typically very good schools. Although I will say, as we head south in Gwinnett, on average, the school quality does dip a little bit. And this is certainly an area where many people commute from Lawrenceville into the city, but one thing you should really know is that traffic is really bad in this area, like top 5 of all the areas that I'm going to mention, not just in your commute into the city, but congestion in the suburb itself. I mean, around rush hour, it's just an endless sea of cars in this area. But I'll tell you what, if you value diversity, safety, schools, you want to be not too far from the city of Atlanta, you like Gwinnett in general, and you're working with a budget, $500 or less, $450,000 or less, Lawrenceville should definitely be on your radar. All right, let's keep going. We're going south a little bit and looking at Snellville. I actually lived in Snellville when I first moved to Georgia. I lived there for a few months. And this is a nice little suburb and one of the ones that has better value. If you're working with a budget, let's say under $450,000, but you want to be in Gwinnett, you want to be not too far from the city, Snellville is definitely worth taking a good look at. Now, it doesn't really have your typical built-up downtown area. It's really going to be a bunch of strip centers. You'll have all your typical amenities of a suburb. A 78 is typically going to be your main way into town, so if it's a nightmare there, you really don't have too many other options. But the median sales price year to date here is $380,000. So as I said, if you're working with a little bit lower of a budget, but you want to be in the suburbs, this could be a good option. It's going to be about 40 minutes into town, depending on where you're headed. Definitely going to be more sparse in terms of the amenities that are close by. Stone Mountain isn't too far away, which, believe it or not, is a pretty popular amenity down here. A little bit more variability when it comes to crime and schools. So you're going to want to really pay attention to certain school clusters and, really look at the area of the house that you're interested in to make sure it's going to work for you and your family. All right, continuing to head back west, let's talk about Lilburn. Lilburn was recently on my list of hidden gem neighborhoods around Atlanta, and I think just geographically, look how close it is to the perimeter of Atlanta. There's really good value here. You're going to have a median sales price year to date of around $400,000. Good schools on average. Definitely a diverse area. Pretty low on the list in terms of amenities that are in or close by to Lilburn. Unless we're talking about parks. Again, if we're talking about outdoors, nature, parks, green spaces, Lilburn, and really all the areas of Gwinnett we're talking about are going to knock that out of the park. But again, this to me is an ideal option if you're coming into the city, more than 3 days a week, or you travel frequently from work. It's not too crazy of a commute to the airport, but you don't have that $500,000 plus budget. And maybe you're looking for a little bit more of a quieter atmosphere. It's very peaceful in Lilburn. Now, it doesn't mean the traffic isn't bad, okay? The traffic is bad in all the areas we're talking about. But that being said, I think there's some of the best value in Lilburn of any of the neighborhoods on my list today. All right, let's start heading back up north a little bit to Norcross, which, along with Smyrna and Sandy Springs, is going to be one of the closest areas to the perimeter. So another great option if you're commuting into work frequently or the airport. Now, around Norcross, Peachtree Corners, Duluth, it gets a little bit more dense here. So you're going to have more options for attached living that also allows you to live here on a tighter budget, with the median sales price year to date here being $325,000. You are also going to have a little bit more variability in terms of crime and school quality in Norcross, though, if we're comparing it to the city of Atlanta, it's much safer. So it's all relative to what your frame of reference is. But I think this could be a really good option for someone who wants to be close to the city, but not in the city. They're working with a significantly lower budget. They don't mind an attached option. And again, this area, Norcross, Peachtree Corners, Chamblee, which we won't talk about, but basically, in between Chamblee and Duluth, this is where Buford Highway runs. So again, if you don't like Asian or Latin American food, this is probably going to be much less relevant for you. But in my opinion, these are the best food areas in all of Metro Atlanta, both for ethnic food and just, great cheap eats. So if you're a foodie, that is something to consider. All right, let's move right along, heading west towards Dunwoody. This is a pretty classic old school Atlanta suburb. Definitely a little bit of an older demographic here. Obviously, you can see it's just north of the city, so no problem if you're working in town or heading to the airport. Although, we're going to talk about Sandy Springs in a minute. I think it's important to note that this direct north-south commute is probably the worst of all the directions that you could imagine coming in and out of Atlanta. And that would go for the airport as well, which is, directly in South Atlanta. So just keep that in mind. If you just absolutely cannot tolerate crazy traffic, you're probably going to want to avoid this entire area just to the north of the perimeter. Sandy Springs, Dunwoody, Roswell, even going up into Alpharetta. This is like the traffic hot zone. Definitely a little bit more expensive in this area, especially considering how close we are to the city. Median sales price year to date of $702,000. Definitely get a starter home cheaper than that, probably in the low fives, something move-in ready but pretty dated and small. It doesn't really have your typical downtown area, but endless retail, shopping, strip centers. So really should cover everything that you need. It's certainly not at the top of my list in terms of value, but geographically, it speaks for itself. It's always going to be a desirable area. All right, let's look at Sandy Springs, which is just outside the perimeter to the north. And of all the areas that I'm talking about today, you talk with someone who lives in Sandy Springs and they absolutely love it. They have a lot of pride. Sandy Springs is known as being a suburb that they made their public works private for a little while, and now they have kind of like a hybrid public-private public works, but they're known for having, great police force, fire department, all public work sectors in general. It's generally viewed as a well-run city. Now, one of the biggest benefits of Sandy Springs is that it has MARTA heavy rail connectivity. This is one of the only areas outside the perimeter where you can park at a MARTA park and ride and take the train all the way down to the airport if you want. So if you travel frequently, that would be a huge benefit of living in Sandy Springs. You save all that money not having to park at the airport or pay as much for transport to the airport. And of course, it doesn't have to be the airport. There's a bunch of different stops you can get off in Atlanta to enjoy the city. But public transportation and heavy rail is really sparse in Atlanta and the surrounding areas. So I gotta point out just how special that is for Sandy Springs. Sandy Springs has a nice little, not really a traditional downtown area. It's called City Springs. It's a little bit newer. It's really nice. There's families out there playing. There's some, good shops and restaurants. You're going to have all your fun, typical suburban things to do in Sandy Springs. Of course, you've got the city at your fingertips. You're surrounded by some other great neighborhoods like Roswell or Marietta. So you really have your choice of things that you want to do on a given day. The median sales price year to date here is $660,000. This is another area with quite a few attached options, so you can certainly live here on more of a budget if you're willing to be in a condo, townhome, or apartment. But again, this is a traffic hot zone. This is one of the worst areas for congestion and for a commute into town. So if you just can't do crazy traffic on the regular, Sandy Springs might not be for you. But it's also got a lot going on for it. All right, let's keep trucking west and talk about Smyrna. Smyrna is one of my favorite suburbs of Atlanta. As you can see, extremely close to the perimeter. As I mentioned before, Cobb County, this is going to be your easiest commute into town on average. It's going to be your easiest commute to the airport on average. The Battery is here where the Atlanta Braves play. That's a huge amenity. Really close to Vinings, which is a very upscale area with a cute downtown inside the perimeter. As I mentioned, Six Flags is not too far away. Downtown Marietta is not too far away. This is one of the fastest growing suburbs in all of Metro Atlanta. There's still some decent value here. There's plenty of options for attached. So this is an area where you could purchase an attached option in the mid to high 200s. If you're looking for an attached option, the median sales price year to date is $479,000. You definitely get a starter home. I have one for sale now actually in the low 400s. But if you want that larger McMansion style home, those are starting in the $600,000 range. Pretty big conglomeration of businesses headquartered in the Smyrna area. So depending on what industry you're in, that could be relevant for you. But I think Smyrna is a great suburb for a younger couple. The school quality here is not going to be quite as good. Kind of like when you go south in Gwinnett, when you go west in Cobb, the school quality just gets a little bit more variable. So this may be for a couple with no kids or very young kids who are not school age yet. But if you want more of an active lifestyle but don't want to be in the city, Smyrna is one of the first places I would tell you to look. All right, let's head back northeast and talk about East Cobb. East Cobb has a reputation for some of the highest quality public schools in all of Metro Atlanta. Really, it's between East Cobb and North Gwinnett. However, unlike North Gwinnett, East Cobb is a very doable commute into town. I had a client who lived in East Cobb and worked in Midtown. He did that commute 5 days a week. Now, traffic varies, of course, but this is not going to be too difficult if you do have to commute in town or to the airport. It has a reputation for being a little bit snobby. I find that to be overblown. The public schools here have a reputation for being rigorous and demanding. Now, for all these reasons, you're definitely going to need a little bit of higher budget here. I would say high 500s for a starter home. But if you reached out to me and told me, Mark, we need a suburb of Atlanta where we can come into town frequently without it being a headache, but we need some of the best schools in a great, safe area, and money's not as much of an object, you have a higher budget, I think East Cobb is one of the first places you have to look. And of course, one of the major benefits of purchasing an area with such highly rated schools is going to be your resale value. I've sold and helped clients buy a few places in East Cobb. It's one of the most competitive real estate markets, regardless of what the interest rates are doing. So it's an area that's going to be competitive when you buy, yes, but when you go to sell, much more likely you're going to make a significant profit, and the whole sales process is going to be pretty quick. All right, let's keep moving and talk about Roswell. This is another one of my favorite suburbs in all of Atlanta. Honestly, if the traffic wasn't so crazy here, I would consider moving to Roswell today. One of my favorite things about Roswell is just how nature focused it is. There's a lot of nature lovers that live in Roswell. It's really close to the Chattahoochee Recreation Center. There's all kinds of outdoor fitters in this area. Really one of the cuter, more quaint downtown areas with some legit restaurants and cafes that I enjoy. So plenty of fun things to do in Roswell. And of course, just looking at the map, look how close you are to Alpharetta, which we'll talk about in a minute. You know, how close you are to Sandy Springs, how close you are to the city. So you're right in the heart of everything at Roswell. You're going to have your pick of the litter in terms of what area or amenities you want to enjoy in a given day. Now, as I've said repeatedly in this video, this is one of the worst traffic areas in all of Metro Atlanta, so definitely keep that in mind. But if the traffic gods smile on you that day, you could certainly get into town sub 30 minutes. So geographically, it's not far, very feasible for a consistent commute to Atlanta throughout the week. In terms of a starter home budget, it's going to be at least in the high fours, probably low fives, and it's probably not going to be too updated at that price. But if you fancy a cute downtown area and lots of great nature-related amenities close by, Roswell is definitely the place to look. All right, let's keep going. Almost there. I've really tried to do this quickly. I'm sure this video is going to be longer than I intended, but, you know, hopefully this is one that you study and come back to and provides you value over time. Let's look north and talk about Milton. Now, Milton has always been known as kind of an uppity, extremely expensive area. Kind of exclusive and not so great ways in the past, but a lot of horse farms out here. This may have changed recently, but they were always known for having zoning requirements minimum of an acre per lot. So certainly if you're interested in multiple acres or a horse farm, that is sort of what Milton is known for. Probably the most expensive area to live on average in all the neighborhoods we're going to discuss today. The median sales price year to date was over $1 million. Now, you could certainly find a starter home cheaper than that, but this is probably not the suburb for you if you're working on more of a budget. There's not a ton going on in Milton itself, but as you can see, you're close to a lot of great amenities. Alpharetta, Roswell, which we just talked about. And again, geographically, you've got a head start on North Georgia, relatively equidistant access to both of the major lakes. This is definitely going to be on the more rural, suburban side, probably one of the safer areas across the board in terms of crime statistics, and very highly rated schools across the board as well. All right, let's talk about Alpharetta, which is talked about probably more than any other suburb in Metro Atlanta. It's probably the most desirable suburb in all of Metro Atlanta. The major reasons being the amenities. You have downtown Alpharetta, which is kind of on the newer side, but a really nice, vast downtown area with plenty of great shops and things to do. But it's not just that. Downtown Alpharetta is connected to Avalon, which is a huge mixed-use project very close by, which is another set of retail, restaurants, shops, a movie theater. They just keep adding stuff in Alpharetta. So by no means would you ever have to go to the city of Atlanta for a nice date night or really any kind of shopping. It's very safe. It's got very good schools. Geographically, it's in the perfect spot, not too far from Atlanta, head start on North Georgia, pretty easy trip to Lanier. Now, for all these reasons, it's one of the more expensive areas in the list today. You've got a median sales price year to date of $716,000. You can definitely find a starter home much cheaper than that, even in the high $400,000 range. You just have to keep in mind it's going to be a much smaller home and it's not going to be updated. But you do not need $700,000 to buy a house in Alpharetta all the time. So if you told me, Mark, look, budget's not an issue. We want to live in the best, most desirable suburb of Metro Atlanta. It's got to be safe and have good schools. I'd have to tell you Alpharetta. It's just got the most amenities per square mile, and it's still being developed like crazy. All right, almost there. I think we should talk about Johns Creek, which is a little bit to the southeast here. You know, kind of a sister city to Alpharetta. It doesn't really have the booming downtown like Alpharetta does, although they are working on a major downtown in Johns Creek. So actually, this might be the time to get in there because I'm sure that's going to have a significant impact on the home values surrounding that development. And Johns Creek already on average is more expensive than Alpharetta. Older demographic, older money, you know, expensive, exclusive swim tennis gated communities, which is the case for, you know, a lot of these Atlanta suburbs. And I think that's kind of an important thing to know if you're wondering, like, what do people do out in these areas? How do people connect with people? It's going to be the swim tennis communities in much of North Georgia. These are the areas that you get to know your neighbors and where you get together for a lot of the events throughout the year. So I know a lot of people are anti-HOA. Well, most of the areas that we're talking about today, I mean, you can certainly find your pockets with no HOA, but on average, most of these areas are going to be pretty HOA heavy. But luckily, many of them offer legitimate amenities to support the monthly cost. The median sales price year to date here is $800,000. You could certainly find a starter home for much cheaper. You can see it's offset to the northeast a little bit, so your trip into town is going to be slightly better than if you were coming directly from Roswell or Alpharetta, but there's also going to be a little bit less to do there. All right, now let's talk about Duluth, which for my money is the best food scene in all of Metro Atlanta. There's a large Asian population in Duluth. So if you like Korean food, Chinese food, Japanese food, if you like an Asian supermarket or farmer's market, you're going to be in paradise in Duluth. And actually, there's still some pretty good value in Duluth in my opinion. We've got a median sales price year to date of $480,000. As I said earlier, it gets a little bit more dense here, so you could certainly find an attached option, probably still in the high $200,000 range. We're still in Gwinnett County. You're going to have good diversity, pretty good public schools across the board, though not quite as good as Suwanee, Buford. Very doable commute into town or the airport. Not saying the traffic isn't bad, I'm just saying it's very doable. And I just really like Duluth. Between the food scene and the price of real estate here, I think it's one of the best value options in Metro Atlanta. All right, and last but not least, we'll end with Peachtree Corners, which you can see is just southwest of Duluth. This is a little bit of a smaller area that's not talked about too much. It does have a nice downtown area. As you can see, very close to town, so that's not going to be too much of a headache for a commute. Plenty of attached options here. The median sales price year to date is $545,000, but again, if you're open to a condo or townhome, you can do much better in this area. It's going to be a pretty safe suburb with good schools. It's not going to have quite the level of amenities as some of the other neighborhoods that we discussed today. But like Norcross, another great option if you're working with a little bit lower of a budget. Maybe you like Gwinnett County. You got to be kind of closer to the city of Atlanta. Again, not to harp on the food thing, but this area is a hot zone for great food. So in terms of those like top 5 areas for value, I think Peachtree Corners would definitely make that list. And one more thing I'll note while I'm at it here, because I get so many clients that either work at CDC or Emory or one of the hospitals in the North Decatur area. And quite often they can't quite afford to live in the city of Decatur or North Druid Hills, or they just want to be in the suburbs. And, you know, I've done this many times before. What is that suburb just outside the perimeter where they can commute to Emory or CDC without it being a major headache? And Tucker is not a place on my list today, but definitely a place I mention. Now, Peachtree Corners, Norcross, admittedly, we're getting pretty far away from the CDC and Emory, but we are on that side of town, and I've seen people make further commutes. So all that to say, if that is you, if you need to be near the east side of Atlanta, Decatur, North Decatur, you know, Emory Village, North Druid Hills, but you're looking to be in the suburbs, this is kind of the quadrant you're going to be looking in, okay? Now, not to say these are areas that you should avoid, but they definitely get dicier in terms of crime and variability with school quality. But so that, you know, Tucker, Lilburn, Norcross, Chamblee, Peachtree Corners, you know, going out a little bit towards Lawrenceville, those are all areas I kind of touch on for those people who need to be relatively close to the east side for whatever reason. Whew! So there you have it, y'all. I talked a lot today. This video is probably going to be like an hour long, but I think that was a pretty good rundown of the major spots to think about in the North Atlanta suburbs. Obviously, it's all going to come down to your budget, if you're commuting somewhere, you know, what your demand is for quality public schools, and what kind of lifestyle that you want to live. So I hope that kind of got you acclimated and comfortable and a little bit more familiar. I work with so many people who have not spent any time in Metro Atlanta. So the purpose of these videos is just to educate and help you identify some places that you can do a deep dive of your own research into. All these places I think would be great places to live for a family looking for a beautiful suburb. So thank you so much for watching. As always, I really hope that provided you value. Again, if you didn't know, this is what we do. We help families and people relocate here from out of state. You don't have to be out of state. If you're in Georgia, we are a full service real estate company. Check out our Google reviews to see what kind of service that we offer. And if you want to talk with me directly and just pick my brain or make fun of me, whatever you want to do, you can book a Zoom call using the link in the description below. Call me, text me. All my information is in the description. I love when my viewers become clients. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, share with a friend, and I'll see you next time.